Hey everybody, thanks for checking out my video. Try to keep this brief as possible. I know sometimes I get a little long-winded on videos. This is in regards to replacing or installing, I should say, Stainless Works or other brand headers that you may find for your town car. This is a 2000 town car I'm referring to. That's what I'm installing mine on. There are some pitfalls to doing this job. It can be done by, the average. Unless you have some mechanical ability, you probably can do this job. I don't recommend you do it if you don't have the proper safety equipment, such as adequate jack stands and jacks and things that you'll need to secure the car, because you will have to have it raised up quite a bit to be able to get under here and do the job. Both sides of the install, I managed to put the headers up from the bottom and fed them up into place, so you don't have to rip the motor out. Although I've heard some people say that you may need to loosen the motor mount up to lift one side of the engine or the other. I didn't run into that. I will mention a couple caveats with the install of the headers. First one's going to be on your driver's side. Going to have to remove the oil dipstick tube and of course the stick itself. I was fortunate enough that on my motor, since this is recently done, well, when I say recent, it's several years ago, I put this motor in the car and built it. When I put the dipstick tube in, I liberally coated the O-ring with some silicone grease and a little bit of Never-Seez on the tube and inserted it into the motor. So when I took it off, it came out without any real fight. If you have an older motor and it's never been out before, expect to probably have it break, unfortunately, and you will have to replace it and get the old one out of the block. So that's one thing to be aware of. As far as access to all the bolts to tighten up the header on the passenger or driver side, it was fairly easy. There's a few tight spots. One bolt in particular, I was maybe lucky to get like a eighth of a turn each time on the bolt. And I will mention something about bolts a little later on in this video. I'm going to go around to the passenger side of my car. As I say, the driver's side is pretty straightforward. The only obstacle or thing that you're going to have to deal with is the dipstick tube. And of course, removing the old exhaust manifolds, which was not an issue on my motor, because when I built this motor, I made sure to liberally coat all the manifold studs with Never-Seez before running them into the head. And I did torque them down to the proper specs. I didn't crank the things down super tight. So I was lucky in that respect. Be prepared. You may snap one off, which is a whole nother ball of wax I didn't have to deal with on this particular motor. But be aware, it could be a possibility in your situation. And please bear with any wind noise you hear. It's very breezy today, and this is a cheap camera I'm using. It's nothing fancy. Passenger side was a bit more of an issue. For one thing, you will have to remove the starter. You can get the header up into place with the starter in, but you'll never access the lower bolts to the flange on the header. The starter will be in your way, so you'll have to remove the starter. And if you have my kind of luck, one of the studs for the starter solenoid will snap off, and I had to order a new solenoid and put on the starter. So that's something else to be aware of. The other issue is there's the top flange, the very back flange bolt is just about impossible to get to from underneath. I have very long arms and I could reach it, but I could not get the bolt started. Once I got my hand and the bolt up in the hole, I had no room to really move my fingers. So as you may notice here in the video, I have taken out the whole fender well, the plastic fender well. It's in my garage. It's not too hard to do. There's two large washers with like an 8 mil hex bolt that have to come out. There's also a couple up here by the battery box that you have to remove. Also, be sure to unhook your wires from the wheel well cover. And as you can see, this makes life a lot easier. I can really get to everything in there much easier. Makes it visible at least so I can see instead of trying to work by feel. Again, the back bolt is a bear to get to, but I did get to it through the top here where I have my hand, and I have big hands, so if you got smaller hands you probably have an easier time getting in there. Also, you're going to, if you're going to keep the EGR valve and tube like I did, you may see that in there. That's the nipple that I'm pointing at here for the EGR tube. Do yourself a favor, order a new one before you even get started on the project, because getting the old one off, you're probably going to mangle it. The first time I got it off easy, well, not easy, but it came off without damaging anything. This second time I removed it to do the header installation, I did have problems, and I might have been able to use it, but I don't want to mess up the threads on the nipple that's on the Stainless Works headers for the tube, so I just ordered a new one. Be prepared to spend about $60 for that if you get the OEM one. I looked at the Dorman one and stayed away from it because in the picture it looked like it was missing the top flange that goes into the EGR valve, control valve itself. The flare was there, but they didn't show the flange or the sleeve, whatever you want to call it, that you tighten up to tighten that flange up against the fitting. So I just went with the OEM. You're probably better off. Spend a few extra bucks. It's probably manufactured better. It's probably better quality metal, and the bends are probably more accurate, and it'll save you grief when you're trying to reinstall it. Other than that, it's a pretty straightforward thing. You know, it's one of those jobs that I wouldn't do unless I had a lot of mechanical experience and a lot of tools. I had various type of 10mm wrenches I used for the bolts. This is like a swivel head with a built-in ratchet into the head. That worked good in some places. There's other places that the tube and the bolt are so close together you cannot get this head onto the bolt. And mentioning the bolts is the last thing I'm going to cover with this video. I'm not trying to turn anybody off from this job. I'm just trying to make them aware of what you may encounter. The Stainless Works bolts that I have gotten with the headers, and this is not a knock against Stainless Works because they make great headers, they're great quality, finish is excellent on it. I got the ceramic coating put on mine, so they'll stay nice and shiny for the life of the car. Probably the headers will last longer than my car does, but my point is the bolts that came with the headers, I have a couple of them right here. This is the ones that come from Stainless Works with the headers, and I had nothing wrong with these. I had nothing against these. They seem to be machined well, but the ends, I don't know what it is about the threading to the ends on these, but I struggled without the headers on, just trying to get these in the head, because what I had done, and I recommend you do it also, is lubricate the threads with a good coating application of Never-Seez, and after I do that, I run them into the block, the head, and run them back out in a couple of times to make sure that it's evenly distributed along the threads. But I had a bear of a time, even after running these through, getting them to start easily by hand. You just couldn't get it quite right. I got these other ones from Summit. I don't know if you can see it very well. It's hard to see on my video screen here on the camera. These are like the Vibra Flex or Vibra Tights, I think they call them. They have a mechanism that you tighten down with a set screw or Allen wrench and a set screw. and there's a star washer that it locks into, supposed to prevent vibration. I mainly bought it for the machining. You can see the tip on these, I think, are machined a little nicer, and they were a lot easier starting in. And I still recommend that you thread them in once before you put the header in, or attempt to put the header in with the anti-seize compound, and then proceed to install the header, because some of these you're going to have to start by hand, and it's very awkward, and the last thing you want to do is cross thread a bolt into aluminum. It's very easy to start running it in, and aluminum, you know, is very easy to damage, in which case you're going to need a tap, which would be an 8mm by 1.25. And also on the header bolts, mentioning the dimensions, you need at least a 25mm long bolt. That's the threaded end. 25mm long by 8mm with a 1.25 thread pitch. Those will work. The 30s may work also if you can get the 30mm. They're a little bit longer, but I went with what the came with the Stainless Works headers. I measured the depth of the threads on the old original manifold studs, and they thread into the head about 20mm worth of threading goes into the head. So 25 is probably about right, because you got to allow for the thickness of the flange, and these do have a pretty thick flange, but I know they'll engage enough of the threads. Okay, so this video went kind of longer than I wanted to. There was a lot of information I wanted to pass on to anybody that is contemplating on doing this. This has taken me quite a while. I'm doing this little here, a little there, and I don't have the ability to film step by step to do this, or I would have made a video like that. This is just kind of a heads up to anybody doing this that wants a little background information. Just make you aware of some of the things you're going to encounter and need. And even if you plan on taking it to somebody, you may want to get those items ahead of time, bring them with you, and say, hey, when you do the headers, you may need these parts. If not, I'll return them. And make the job go a little quicker. Otherwise, your car is going to be tied up while you're waiting for parts. Like I say, this is a kind of a convenience car. I don't use it for work. It's just something I, have fun riding around in. So it's been up on blocks for the last 3 or 4 weeks. I do a little at a time when I can. Due to the hours I work and stuff, I get home at night, it's dark, and or I'm tired. And also, I mentioned in one of my other videos, I have other physical problems with my back and things that slow me way down and makes things take longer. But anyway, guys, that's just a heads up. Hope this helps anybody. If you have any questions or comments, leave them below in the comments section, and I will try to respond to any of your questions. Thanks for watching, if you're still watching, and have a good day.